talking about a little bit before we started doing this, is that now that the Ascension is over and LCQ is coming up, there's actually nothing to play for. There is nothing for Tier 3 and Tier 2 to play for. And on top of that, the Tier 1 teams have no one to scrim against, forcing Sentinels to play against like a bunch of pub players and like a bunch of people who are in former Tier 2 teams that are playing pugs together to get in some scrim time. I know you have a lot of thoughts about this. Do you feel like Riot has not done a very good job in terms of the way that they've scheduled this to leave such a huge opening at the end of the year like this?
Yeah, I think it's really bad. I think for a lot of reasons, right? Like one, I have on the screen right now FNS's tweet, which is, now that we've qualified and it's all set and done, I'll say it again, this format took everything out of us. I played one match a week for 9 weeks, then played 5 matches, 2 of which were PO5s in 1 week. Now we have Tokyo, then Champs a month later, then 5 months off, bruh. And so like he's complaining about like the density in the middle of the schedule compared to what it actually feels like to play in the regular season. It's totally different ball game, right? And I mention this sometimes in my coach streams, just like the week-to-week games and how you can plan for that. That's so different than playing a game every day when you're in like the upper bracket or lower bracket of one of these tournaments. Like you have no prep time. You have to do similar stuff. You can't change your comps. You don't have time for that shit. Like you're playing totally different styles of Valorant at that point. And I like it because it does battle test the teams. But what FNS is complaining about a lot is the amount of off time. And he wants it to be where it's spread out more. But another issue, which is later brought up, is the fact that the challenger scene is done right now. So the guard has ascended now into VCT Americas. M80 is now waiting, and who knows what's going to happen, right? If they're going to get offers from any of the VCT teams, like we just mentioned. And there's no one to scrim against. There's no one. No Tier 2 teams are going to be playing right now. There's nothing to play for on the horizon. No Tier 3 teams really exist, like that are even worth playing if you're a VCT Americas level team, and one that's going to Champions nonetheless. And if you're going to Champions, you probably don't want to play against teams that you could potentially play against at Champions. So then now you're thinking like, well, what about the LCQ teams? Like, okay, so the LCQ teams could indeed play those Champions teams, but there's only a certain number of teams in LCQ, and the LCQ teams probably don't want to play each other too much for the same reasons I just said about the Champions teams. And something about Valorant is once you start playing like the same team a few times, it's like a micro game. It's like they know the things you like doing because there's only so many ways you can use your utility. And some teams like the PRX style where it's very punchy and unexpected plays that win. And the more you scrim a team, the less punchy those plays are. And then you're not really practicing. If anything, you're losing confidence. So the scrims feel terrible for some of these teams. Like a lot of them probably can't even find scrims right now. That's probably why you see Sentinels streaming during like the middle of the week. Is that's the best form of practice they can get other than like server side practice. Because something that's important about scrimming is it at very least keeps like your comms up and your individual skill up. And I mean, they have to do a couple of them every day, right? Like they have to play someone. They have to find some group of people to play against. And it's just the way that the scheduling was thought out is like these teams have no one to play against right now. I'm certain of it because it was something that honestly we even kind of ran into last year on 100 Thieves. Like, and I can't imagine what it's like now that there's a partner league.
I mean, it's going to get even worse because after some of these LCQ teams get knocked out, as we've talked about, there's a very good chance those rosters will be disbanded or there will be several players whose contracts will be coming to an end, immediately finalizing after their elimination. So that's going to give even less teams for those who qualified for Worlds to scrim against to actually get some practice going into Worlds. Now, I know that Riot is going to have third-party tournaments in the off-season, which are yet to be announced. Like we had Red Bull, Homegrounds, Last year, you had Ludwig and Tarek doing their thing, and I'm sure there will be a couple others. I know that Riot also wants to have a sizable off season to give players time, time off, similar to professional sports. But I do think that with such an extended break between the events and with such little teams qualifying for each event, because of course if you had lock-in, you had every single team. But for all the other Masters events and Worlds, you only have three of the top teams from each of the different leagues that are qualifying. And most of the teams are not playing in the international events. And it leaves a lot of downtime for not just the even tier 3, tier 2, but I think even the tier 1 scene, there's a significant amount of downtime besides the regular season. The playoffs are not a true playoffs with a ton of teams. I think it is actually very minimal. How is Riot supposed to, or even going to, address this? It feels like this was a lot of my concern and critique from last year. There was even less going on last year before the start of the Partnership League this year, and it doesn't seem like they're too bothered by the structure this year. Like, I've complained a ton about the lack of teams at the Masters events. I complained, even though I understood the way the format worked at lock-in with everybody there, and it had having to be single elim and best of 3 and whatnot. But it really does feel like there is, especially when comparing to Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike kind of has the opposite problem, where there's too many tournaments and there's too many events, and you have ESL and Blast competing against each other for the calendar year, and you have like the majors in between, and there's probably too much going on. But I do think that Counter-Strike's advantage over Valorant is that there is a significant amount of the schedule there for teams to play in, including tier 2 teams making it into these international lands. And Valorant just does not have enough opportunities for teams to play on, let alone give reason to continue competing throughout the year for people to scrim. So I don't even think that Riot thought about the scrim practice issue happening later on in the year, let alone the actual competing process.
I thought lock-in was cool at the time, right? Because it's like the inaugural season of the Partner League. I thought it was really cool to get all the teams in one spot to have them duke it out for a tournament. I understand like the limitations they had to set for that, because it's honestly like probably a logistics nightmare to have something like that go down. So they did the best they could. Like, I'm not going to hold anything against them there, truthfully. I think my biggest concern with everything is the tier 2 scene and like the talent pipeline, right? Like, I had already mentioned previously that there's 5 VCT North American teams and 6 now with the Guard. So that likely means there's like 6 Sentinel players now in North America, 6 controllers, 6 initiators, 6 duelists, right? Like 6 IGLs at the top. That's not a lot. So when there's this fat gap after Challengers ends, and all of the Challengers teams just start dropping their teams because there's no reason to keep them. We already saw it with G2 and TSM, to name some of the biggest ones, just dropping their teams. Because why are you going to keep paying them for 6 months to do nothing? To play no events, to do nothing, right? So the longer that this goes on, the harder it becomes for someone to come up through a talent pipeline. Because if I'm building 100 Thieves, I'm not taking a risk on some unknown commodity. Like, there's 6 slots for duelists. Like, Ye isn't even in VCT Americas right now. Like, I could poach someone from another region. I could do all kinds of stuff, right? But there's no way that someone from tier 3 or tier 2 can come up unless they're from like literally a top level challenger level team like M80 or the Guard, right? It becomes very hard to get that visibility. And I see that becoming harder and harder over time, unless there's changes made to the system. That's my true worry here, actually, is like, in like 3 years, how is it that like someone that comes into the game can like make it? Like how are they going to get their shot? They're going to have to grind the ranked leaderboard and then just like pray that a team needs that spot, but then also pray that they're going to take a huge risk on an unknown commodity instead of like proven experienced people. It just seems unlikely. As someone that comes from an open circuit in Counter-Strike where, like Shazam played for a team called Denial, and then that team beat me when I was on Cloud9, and thus we wanted to pick up Shazam, right? Like, it works different in an open circuit because, like you said, there's tournaments all the time. Tier 2 teams playing against tier 1 teams, tier 1 teams playing against tier 3 teams. Like, everyone's all over the place. Like, everyone's playing everyone, and you really get to decide, like, oh man, like this player is insane, right? Like, there's so many pro players all getting paid. But in Valorant, like, there's a problem with like the larger ecosystem right now, and that seems like an issue, and I don't know what the solution is to it.
It's definitely something that, I mean, Riot, the entire purpose of the partnership existing is that they wanted to, and only having 10 teams and now 11 per region, they did want to try to combine all the talent into a few teams. They wanted to create these super teams. They wanted to coalesce, all the tier 1 talent on a couple teams instead of having it spread out. And I think they've actually done a relatively good job with the Ascension system in terms of getting tier 2 teams an opportunity to get to tier 1. That's, the Guard being able to get to VCT is one of the asks that the League of Legends players were, protesting for and, threatening to go on strike for, so they could get implemented into LCS. So Riot actually, compared to how they've been running LCS in the League of Legends circuit, actually have learned a couple things and have done a lot better with the way they've done Valorant.
Oh, for sure. And something that I didn't include in that first thing, and why this is so complex in my head, is, like I said, I come from Counter-Strike, and I'm a player turned content creator. And let me tell you, there's a reason why you don't see big content creators, like huge content creators in Counter-Strike. And it's because, like Rod said, there's a tournament every week, and it's hogging up all of the viewership. And content creators cannot exist in that ecosystem. Now, something else I know is that content creators probably are able to reach more eyeballs on a more consistent basis than an esport is, in my opinion. And having these big content creators wanting to play your game and get that viewership might actually be more beneficial to a company like Riot than having esport in the latter half of the year, right? Like, you use esports to boost viewership, market in that way, but then you do need a dead time in your calendar to allow these content creators to come in and enjoy the game and market to a totally different fan base, right? Because that's all esports is marketing. And there's other forms of marketing, like influencers and content creators, that Riot is great at working with, right? Like, they want to do those things also. And it's very hard to do that if it's just esports all the time, because it's going to hog viewership. And yeah, I mean, that's why they've allowed people to co-stream, right? Yeah, to allow stuff like that to happen and bring in completely new audiences.
Yeah, we got little bros everywhere now.
Facts.
Because of Tarek. Tarek has done such an incredible job of bringing new people in. I mean, his stream is like twice as big as the official stream, which I think is great, and actually has a lot of drawbacks too. There is some concern of Tarek. What if he gets sick? What if he can't make it for a couple days? Is the entire Valorant esports ecosystem going to collapse because Tarek isn't there? That I actually think is a potential issue. But we can talk about that at a later time. Personally, I would like to see Riot work with an organization like ESL or Blast in the latter half of the season. I think things like the Tarek Level Invitational are really cool. I think Red Bull is really cool. But I do think that ESL and Blast bring a certain level of professionalism, because they have such a long history, especially ESL and Counter-Strike, that they could do a lot of cool stuff here in Valorant that maybe, I know Riot has been quite apprehensive of working with, they haven't worked with ESL since they used to do the IEM stuff with League of Legends many, many, many years ago. And they do a little bit with Blast now, but it's not on like the level of a huge international tournament. I would like to see one event at the end of the year with one of those two to kind of supplement end of the year stuff, give teams a reason to continue playing and practicing, even if it was just to alleviate the issues with tier 1 teams having no one to practice for the World Championship. I don't think that Riot really thought about this particular problem when it came to setting the offseason.
Yeah. The last thing, my literally last thing is just there's also a tremendous amount of burnout by the time, you know, the season's over.
Sure.
As someone that experienced it and watched it happen within my team, like after Champions was over, it's like, whew, we can finally take a break. You know, like we were just boot camping for 3 straight weeks in Texas to win LCQ. And then straight from LCQ, we go to Istanbul for like, you know, 2 to 3 more weeks. And it's like, I just want to be home. I just want to be home. Like everyone on the team just wanted to be home. And all of the teams in VCT Americas that are from other regions, they're going to want to go home. Like they're going to be with their families for the first time in like months. And there's nothing that's going to stop that. Like they want that so bad, right? Like they definitely want that. They miss their family. Like everyone's going to miss their family. They're going to be homesick after the amount of time like a team like Crew or MIBR or something like has been in Los Angeles is like, they want to go home. They miss home for sure. So like, I don't know how like, because that's a big portion of the pro teams, right? Like you can never control something like that. It's a complex issue. It really is.
Yeah, for sure. Riot's just going to have to do a little bit more tinkering going into next year. See what they come up with.